The beautiful medieval city of Edinburgh has a colourful but gruesome past. With its winding cobblestone streets, its classical architecture, castle and underground streets and vaults, Edinburgh is a place like no other. Scotland's capital since 1437, Edinburgh at one time was a walled city. Defences were essential to keep the city safe and to protect its occupants from bloody attacks and invasions. Regarded by many as the most haunted place in Scotland, Edinburgh has been the scene of ghost stories and legends for centuries. But the ghostly apparitions don't just haunt the city's famous landmarks. Its many pubs are also frequented by the long-dead customers and residents. Poltergeist activity, strange sounds and full-body apparitions have been witnessed in and around many of Old Reeky's drinking dens. We'll start in the Grassmarket and end near Arthur's Seat. So, grab a pint and let's take a look at Edinburgh's haunted pubs and streets and delve into the city's dark past. The earliest written records for the White Hart Inn date back to 1516. However, only the cellars survive from this time, and the building above ground dates back to 1740. The location of the White Hart proved popular for those travelling via stagecoach, which left from the Grassmarket. It is regarded as one of the oldest pubs in the city, and has held a licence for over 500 years. Many say this is the most haunted pub in Scotland. Located in the Grassmarket, directly below Edinburgh Castle, and historically Edinburgh's main marketplace for buying and selling livestock, the Grassmarket today is a bustling hub of pubs, restaurants and shops. Despite being a thriving centre of commerce, the Grassmarket has a much darker side as a place of execution. From 1660 until the last hanging in 1784, many people met their end here. The White Hart Inn was also a firm favourite among spectators on public hanging days, and rooms in the upper stories of the inn would have been rented out to those that could afford to part with a few pence and who simply wanted a better view. Spectators would have enjoyed a pie washed down with the landlord's ale while watching the grisly spectacle. Even a hangman was executed at the Grassmarket after he was found guilty of murdering a beggar. Over 100 Covenanters who opposed religious reform were put to death in what was known as the Killing Times between 1661 and 1668. In 1784, James Andrews became the last person to be hanged at the Grassmarket for a robbery he committed in Hope Park. The pub gets its name from a miraculous event that occurred in Edinburgh in 1127. The Scottish king, David I, despite the advice of his priest, decided to hunt upon the feast day of the Holy Rood, the Scots name for the Holy Cross. He witnessed a huge white stag and gave chase, but suddenly fell from his horse. The furious stag turned upon its pursuer, and King David began praying desperately to God for his salvation. The story is that a fiery cross appeared between the stag's antlers before it vanished from sight. A grateful King David built a shrine upon the site of this miracle, founding Holyrood Abbey, the ruin of which is seen today at the rear of Holyrood Palace, at the foot of the Royal Mile. One of the pub's claims to fame is that Robert Burns likely stayed here on his last visit to Edinburgh in 1791. William Wordsworth and his sister Dorothy, who famously commented that the pub was not noisy and tolerably cheap, were overnight guests at the White Hart during their tour of Scotland in 1803. Another claim to fame is its award in 2005, claiming it to be the most haunted pub in Edinburgh. Over the years, owners, staff members and guests have seen and reported numerous ghostly happenings, with visitors having their hair pulled, staff witnessing plates flying off shelves, beer taps being turned off, an annoying hindrance to the staff's daily work. The cellar is often the focal point of paranormal activity. A dark, shadowy figure has been seen at the doorway behind the bar before heading down to the cellar. Upon investigation, the cellar is always empty. A detached pair of legs, followed by a full figure in the centre of the cellar near the fridges, has been witnessed several times. When staff members are checking food supplies in the walk-in fridge, they find themselves greeted by the fridge door slamming closed behind them. Barrels in the cellar are also moved around from one place to another. This mischievous spirit is also thought to be responsible for the recurring problem with the beer taps not working. Upon inspection, the gas cylinders are often detached and are reattached by staff using a heavy-duty spanner. After heading back up to the bar, the taps fail to work yet again. Loud repetitive blows have also been heard coming from inside the walk-in fridge, and intermittent bangs come from other areas of the cellar. On the 31st of October 2004, the Ghost Club carried out an investigation into the main bar and the cellar of the White Hart Inn to try and obtain some answers to the paranormal mysteries. Communication, it seems, was established with a female spirit named Sally Beggs and the year 1754. Temperature drops were recorded and more communication came through. Sally knew the local area well, perhaps she worked on the streets here, and that she had died of a respiratory disease. Her body was discovered on the Grassmarket one morning. At the top of the stairs, a dark shadowy figure of a man has been seen wearing a tricorn hat. Who he is, nobody knows. But another male spirit with the name of Jack is also said to haunt the pub. He is said to be a shy, disfigured and not terribly attractive man due to a combination of scarring or the presence of a skin condition. He appears to be around 50 years old, with a broad stature and wearing a cloak over his shoulder. Could this be a former landlord or someone who received burns in the Great Fire of Edinburgh in November 1824? In 2013, an Australian couple captured what they believe is one of the many spectres that haunts the old inn. What do you think? But there's another grisly story connected to the White Hart. From around 1800 onwards, the area of the Grassmarket became a focal point for the influx of Irish immigrants, and a high number of lodging houses appeared for those unable to pay a regular rent. Many of the immigrants came to work in construction, particularly on the 31-mile-long Union Canal, built to link Edinburgh to Falkirk, to bring minerals and coal to the capital city. Two such immigrants were William Burke and William Hare. It is said that they were regulars in the pub and would frequently fight in drunken brawls, but they used the White Hart to intoxicate their victims and lure them to their nearby lodgings. Hare came to Scotland from Ireland and had several occupations before becoming keeper of a lodging house in Edinburgh, where Burke, also Irish-born, arrived in 1827. On November the 29th, an old man died in the house of natural causes, and Hare, angry that the deceased still owed £4 in rent, devised a plan to steal the corpse from its coffin and sell it to recover the rent he was owed. Edinburgh was a leading European centre of anatomical study in the early 19th century, in a time when the demand for cadavers led to a shortfall in legal supply. Scottish law required that corpses used for medical research should only come from those who had died in prison, those who'd ended their lives deliberately, or from foundlings and orphans. The shortage of corpses led to an increase in body snatching by what were known as resurrection men or resurrectionists, who would illicitly remove bodies from graves. With the help of Burke, the pair sold the corpse to Robert Knox, a leading Edinburgh anatomy teacher, for £7.10. The significant profit led the two men, assisted by their common-law wives, during the following months to entice at least 16 of the city's poor, usually under the influence of alcohol, into their lodging house, where they gave them more drinks and then smothered them, in order to leave no trace of violence. Afterwards, they sold the corpses to Knox's School of Anatomy at Surgeons Square. Their last victim was found dead under a bed, and they were reported to the police, and the pair were arrested. However, as there was insufficient evidence, Hare was persuaded to testify against Burke and allowed to flee. Burke, however, was tried for murder, found guilty and hanged at Edinburgh's Lawn Market on the 28th of January 1829. After his execution, he was publicly dissected, and his death mask and a book made of his skin are on display at the city's Surgeons' Museum. His skeleton is also displayed at the Anatomical Museum of Edinburgh University. It is not known what became of Hare. In his confession, Burke exonerated Knox of all knowledge of the crimes, but some years passed before Knox lived down the condemnations of the public and the press. Helen Burke was released after the jury found the charges against her were not proven. She later moved, but was haunted by vigilantes seeking her death. Close to the White Hart Inn is the Last Drop, so named because of its proximity to the gallows. Rumour has it that this is the pub where men who had been sentenced were taken for their last meal, while the gallows across the road were being prepared for them. As they left the pub, they were given one last drink, a last whisky, referred to as one for the road, before their last drop through the scaffold's trapdoor. The name The Last Drop also refers to the final hanging held in the Grassmarket in 1784. This impressive building was once part of tenements which housed some of Edinburgh's most poverty-stricken residents. The spirit that haunts the Last Drop is said to be that of a young girl who may have lived here during its time as a dwelling. She is a small child wearing medieval clothing, and it is believed that she lived in a crowded multi-family property on this site. The tenements here became a slum area and were demolished in the early 20th century. The pub we see today was rebuilt between 1929 and 1930, using the building's original stones. She has been seen by staff and customers both in the cellar and the bar area. Some people believe that she is an Irish girl whose name is Maria, who may have been the victim of a murder. No official records of such a crime exist, but could her murder have simply been covered up? Is Maria responsible for poltergeist activity in the pub? Staff have witnessed items being moved and pictures falling from the wall, but they always remain intact and are never smashed. In February 2007, the landlady witnessed a cup of hot chocolate moving by itself. Perhaps Maria, like many children, has a sweet tooth. But perhaps the strangest and most unnerving activity here involves the staff. It seems Maria knows them one by one, and even calls their names when there's nobody else present. The stone tape theory holds that certain materials, like stone, can store recordings of historical events. These recordings can then be played back on a loop, appearing as ghosts or paranormal activity. Could this be the case with the Last Drop? But it seems Maria is a friendly spirit who is quite content to dwell in this charming Grassmarket pub. Just around the corner from the last drop is Victoria Street, and this area is haunted by one of Edinburgh's most interesting ghosts. Sir Walter Scott said of our next case, "It is certain that no story of witchcraft or necromancy, so many of which occurred near and in Edinburgh, made such a lasting impression on the public as that of Major Weir." Thomas Weir lived as an affluent and well-respected member of the community. Born in 1599 in Lanarkshire, he was a descendant of one of the most powerful and ancient families in the country, the Weir de Veres. He was the son of Thomas Weir, Laird of Kirkton, and his wife Lady Jean Somerville, who was reputed to possess clairvoyant powers. He was a proud Scotsman and was a lieutenant in the army, even serving in Ulster during the Irish Rebellion of 1641. In 1650, he obtained the post of commander of the Edinburgh Town Guard, the city's earliest police force, thus acquiring the rank of major. Weir was dedicated to the Presbyterian Church and would conduct prayer sessions at his home in the West Bow area, which he shared with his sister Jean, who was also known as Griselle. These meetings were attended by large crowds, keen to witness this impressive public speaker at work. He was a striking figure, tall, dark, with a grim face and a large nose. He always dressed in black, with a long cloak, and he carried a thornwood staff carved with a strange human head wherever he went. Weir would sometimes preach in the streets, working himself up into a religious frenzy, during which he would brandish forth the thornwood staff. The dark staff, with its bizarre head on top and carvings about its shaft, was widely assumed to be nothing more than a walking aid, while others swore that they had seen the staff move by itself. In the later years of his life, however, Weir began to behave strangely, and this came as a great shock to the entire city. Following retirement, Weir fell ill in 1670 and from his sickbed began to confess to a secret life of crime and vice. A life of sin and evil. Major Weir's confession was entirely voluntary, unprompted, and given his reputation in the part of Edinburgh where he lived, completely unexpected. As a high-ranking public figure, Weir was not believed at first, but his own confession, together with that of his sister, sealed his fate. The many horrific acts Weir confessed to included liaising with the devil and inappropriate behaviour with animals, as well as his own sister. Both Weir and his sister were taken to the Tolbooth prison in the Canongate for interrogation. Griselle also admitted to these crimes and confessed that her brother had once travelled in a phantom fiery coach, driven by a demonic driver, so close was his relationship with Satan. She also stated that her brother obtained his dark powers from the cane he carried with him everywhere he went. Griselle proudly showed off a mark on her forehead in the shape of a horseshoe, which appeared when she frowned. It was the mark given to her by the devil, she said. This was enough for her to be charged with consulting witches, necromancers, and devils. Those who encountered Weir during his lifetime would later claim that the cane had a mind of its own and would dance in front of him as he walked down the street. If true, nobody would have been surprised when he confessed to being a follower of the Lord of Darkness. To be accused of witchcraft in Scotland was a serious matter. The accused, who were tried and usually executed by burning, were brought to the attention of the Kirk sessions and courts, often following flimsy, baseless accusations made by neighbours or relatives with a grudge to bear. Most of the confessions resulted from questioning and sometimes physical pressure. They were cross-examined by John Sinclair, the minister of Ormiston, and put on trial on the 9th of April, 1670. Both were quickly found guilty at their trial and sentenced to death. Weir was strangled and burned at the stake at the head of Leith Walk, where Greenside Church was later built. Then his remains were gibbeted at the Gallow Lee, literally Gallows Field, on the road between Edinburgh and Leith. Jean was sentenced to be hanged on the Tuesday morning in the Grassmarket of Edinburgh. Even before he was executed, there were stories of the cane moving in front of Weir, even opening doors, convincing many that witchcraft was involved. After his execution, the black staff was thrown onto the fire, where witnesses say it twisted and turned, burning for a long time, before it was finally consumed. Weir's house stood empty for many years, as the people of Edinburgh were too scared to live in the former home of such an evil individual. But stories began to swirl around the neighbourhood, and people claimed that the apparition of Weir had returned. How else would they see lit candles in the sinister home's windows at night? They heard terrifying laughter, shouting, music, and even saw the outline of a man holding a cane, staring down onto the street below. Even his spectral sister began to appear. When the bells of the mighty St. Giles struck midnight, she would appear at the window, her pale, gnarled face gazing out on those walking home. At the same time, Weir would flee the area on a flaming, headless horse. For over a century, Weir's house stood empty because of its reputation for being haunted. Considered by locals to be the most haunted house in Edinburgh, an elderly couple, sceptical of the stories, purchased it cheaply in 1780. A retired soldier named William moved in with his wife, but fled in fear shortly afterwards. They had encountered a number of demonic apparitions which made them instantly regret their purchase. It was said that one of Weir's dark rituals made people ascending the staircase believe they were actually descending in the opposite direction. The couple are said to have fled the house after experiencing a strange apparition of a calf approaching them in the night, propping itself up with its forelegs at the end of the bed and staring at them. Eventually, Weir's house was set to be demolished, and the people of Edinburgh were convinced this was to get rid of the stigma surrounding the area. But research in 2014 into the history of the area suggests it was actually incorporated into another building, which is now the Quaker Meeting House. The part of Weir's house that still remains is now the toilet area of the Quaker Meeting House. The apparition of Thomas Weir, dressed in a long black cloak, is seen walking through the streets of the West Bow, particularly Victoria Street, close to where he lived, and the Grassmarket area. In his hand, he carries his devil-crafted cane, which he taps loudly on the cobblestones, scaring unsuspecting pedestrians. Another story tells of a phantom coach and 6 black horses that thunders down Victoria Street late at night. Among various other spooky happenings, the staff at the Quaker Meeting House have reported seeing Thomas Weir moving through the building, walking through walls in the toilets, searching for his former abode. The Mitre is situated on the Royal Mile, in the heart of the old town of Edinburgh. This centrally located pub sits proudly between 2 iconic landmarks, Edinburgh Castle at the top of the hill and Holyrood Palace at the bottom, close to Arthur's Seat. The Mitre has been home to paranormal activity for many decades. Before it became the cosy pub we see today, the site was occupied by a fine tenement building that was owned by John Spottiswoode, the Bishop of St Andrews. John Spottiswoode was born into a family of Protestant ministers and played a pivotal role in shaping the religious landscape of Scotland in the early 17th century. He was a strict Presbyterian and was a royal supporter when King James VI came to the throne in 1603. He became Archbishop of Glasgow and St Andrews and went on to become a moderator of the church. He continued in royal favour under King Charles I and was made Chancellor of Scotland in 1635. King Charles I's attempts to assert royal prerogatives in the Scottish Church and appoint bishops to state positions sparked tensions. He loyally supported the attempt to impose the King's Book of Common Prayer in Scotland, although he thought it was a mistake. This ultimately led to his downfall. In 1637, an uprising in Edinburgh against the monarchy and bishops escalated into a national revolt. Following riots in Edinburgh, he fled to Newcastle, fearing for his life. He was deposed in his absence on a series of spurious charges, including adultery and sacrilege. The Assembly found him guilty of profaning the Sabbath by gambling, riding through the country all day and drinking in taverns until midnight. He is buried in Westminster Abbey. The former tenement building burnt down in 1814 and was replaced with another one, including the present-day pub. But there is a legend connected to John Spottiswoode. In his haste to leave Edinburgh and flee the angry mob, he bricked up his ceremonial regalia and his episcopal chair somewhere in the building, possibly in its cellars. It is the apparition of Spottiswoode who has been blamed for poltergeist activity in the pub, mostly concerning electrics. There are those who believe he thoroughly disapproves of his former home being used as an insalubrious drinking den. As a clergyman, he stood firmly against the use of alcohol. In 1993, some electricians reported receiving some rather severe electric shocks, despite all the power to the building being disconnected. Another man was physically pushed whilst installing a music system and turned around to find nobody there. The music sometimes plays intermittently and the power to it goes off for no reason. Perhaps the Archbishop disapproves of modern tunes. Often, when the pub is refurbished or renovated, the activity increases. Doors open, bottles fall from shelves, things go missing and glasses smash. The cellar is said to have a heavy atmosphere. Is it the case that Archbishop Spottiswoode is still fiercely guarding his ceremonial regalia and chair once more? The Tolbooth Tavern is located at 167 Canongate, towards the lower end of the Royal Mile. It is part of the original Tolbooth built here in 1591, when Edinburgh was divided into two areas, the Royal Burgh and the Canongate, which was outside of the town walls. The Tolbooth was located just in the middle of both locations and was used to collect tolls from travellers who wanted to enter Edinburgh. It also served as a council chamber, a police station and prison, and in order to help protect the city's safety, gun loops and turrets were constructed. In 1884, the Tolbooth clock was added to the building, a famous Edinburgh landmark today. In time, Canongate was fully incorporated into Edinburgh, so the need for toll collecting stopped. The Tolbooth lost its purpose and was subsequently turned into a tavern not much later. The tavern now sits alongside the People's Story Museum, which has a display showcasing what a cell in the former prison looked like. The tavern's dark history has ties to an exorcism of a suspected warlock which took place on the premises. In the 16th century, the poor man suspected to be possessed by the devil was exorcised by the Justice Clerk for Edinburgh, Sir Lewis Bellenden, who had the skills to drive it out. The exorcism was said to be so terrifying and ghastly that the warlock died of fright. Some believe this is proof that it worked. Sir Lewis Bellenden's initials are engraved above the archway of the Tolbooth Wynd to this day. The evil spirit of the warlock, held prisoner in the Tolbooth for sorcery, is said to roam its halls and pace the steps of the clock tower. One female tourist wandering the older parts of the building claims that a deep, raspy male voice demanded that she get out, which she did immediately. The pub is haunted by the spirits of the Covenanters who perished in the prison during the mid-1600s. Between 1661 and 1688, people of the Scottish Presbyterian movement, known as the Covenanters, were imprisoned here for treason. This was not the only place in Edinburgh where they were held prisoner. Greyfriars Kirkyard, another of the city's haunted locations, was a place for them too, and it was the brutal lawyer George Mackenzie who ordered the execution of many of the Covenanters and deportation as slaves for many more. Patrons of the Tolbooth Tavern claim that the back section of the pub is where the paranormal activity usually occurs. The Tolbooth Tavern has reports of knocking, banging and disembodied voices, with the occasional drink being thrown off the tavern's bar. In the rear of the pub, at the back of the Royal Mile, there are buildings that were used for housing between 1750 and the 20th century. For some reason, people feel uneasy there. The atmosphere is very pressing, and people report feeling sick, dizzy and overwhelmed with sadness. The pub also is haunted by an unnamed spirit who is often described as a shadowy figure, but most people are convinced it is a male energy. This spirit roams around the pub causing mischief, pushing glasses and bottles off tables and knocking pictures off the walls. In 2007, a lady who regularly visited the pub witnessed books physically moving off a shelf, for no apparent reason, at the front of the bar. And there are several child spirits who play throughout the pub. Their tiny footsteps and giggles are often heard. Nobody knows who they are, but they seem to be quite content. And finally, the apparitions of two men dressed in old-fashioned military uniform have been seen enjoying a pint within the pub. Could this be James Park and another fellow guard who were incarcerated here many centuries ago for allowing their fellow prisoners to escape? The Sheephead Inn is a public house in Duddingston, just a few miles from the centre of Edinburgh. It is thought an inn has existed on this site since 1360, although the core of the current building appears to date from the 18th century, with later additions and alterations. This is considered to be one of the oldest pubs in Scotland. The Sheephead also possesses an old-fashioned bowling alley, built around 1880, which is reputedly the last such alley in Scotland. Historically, Duddingston was something of a magnet for sheep butchers, and sheep reared in nearby Holyrood Park were brought to the village for slaughtering. Understandably, the sheep's heads were one of the less popular items at the local meat markets. Chefs at the time didn't have the luxury of letting any part of the animal go to waste, however, and made use of the leftovers in dishes such as singed sheep head and pasaudi, a broth or soup made from sheep's heads. Until the late 19th century, the use of these skulls was so commonplace that the locals used them as cobbles for their pathways. King James VI of Scotland was a frequent visitor to the pub, as was his mother, Mary Queen of Scots. So fond was he of the venue that in 1580 he presented a gift to the landlord of a snuff box featuring a ram's head, which may have inspired the pub's name. The box was displayed at the inn for around 300 years before being sold at auction by a previous landlord in need of cash. It now resides at Dalmeny House. But there are some more modern royal connections with the inn. In 2016, regulars enjoying a pint were left shocked when Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II popped in for a cosy lunch following a day at Musselburgh Racecourse. Staff at the pub were only given an hour's notice before her arrival, and they were sworn to secrecy regarding the details of her visit. Though it is said that her party ordered portions of lamb and sea bass along with half a bottle of white wine and a martini. In addition to hosting royalty, two of Scotland's most celebrated literary figures, Robert Burns and Sir Walter Scott, are known to have been regulars in the late 18th century. The ghost of a little girl is said to haunt the Skittle Alley. In October 1993, a taxi driver heard the sounds of skittles clattering despite it being 2:30 in the morning, well after the landlord had called time. Who the little girl is, nobody knows, but some believe she was involved in an accident on the road outside and was brought into the pub where she died. Perhaps she enjoys playing skittles and returns to the place where she so tragically lost her life. It seems a former landlord also haunts the pub. In 2006, a young girl visiting the pub with her parents was seen talking to herself close to the bar. Her parents asked who she was conversing with, and she replied Old Major, and pointed to a seat just next to the bar where he had apparently been sat. Strangely, some of the older patrons of the pub recalled that this seat had indeed been a favourite of a landlord from the 1950s, a retired army veteran known by all as the Major. Perhaps Old Major returns to haunt his beloved pub that in life he was so proud of. I hope you enjoyed these stories from Edinburgh's pubs, and I was in Edinburgh recently, and it is such an amazing city. There's so much to see and do there, and if you love ghost stories and history, Edinburgh is absolutely perfect. It's also a beautiful place architecturally with its amazing stonework and dramatic buildings, and I think you can't help but get caught up in the magic of Edinburgh. You might be wondering why I didn't cover Whistle Binkies and the Banshee Labyrinth, which are two reputedly haunted pubs/nightclubs, I suppose, and that's because they are part of the Southbridge Vaults complex, which I visited while I was in Edinburgh, and I will cover the Edinburgh Vaults in a separate video. There are so many ghost stories in Edinburgh, it's impossible to cover all of it in one go. I did visit Mary King's Close, I did go to the castle and Holyrood and Greyfriars, all of which have ghost stories connected to them, and these will be covered in the future. I did have a wonderful meal in the Mitre, which has recently been refurbished, and I did ask about paranormal activity, and one member of staff told me that they hadn't experienced anything personally, but there's another member of staff whose gran worked at the Mitre for many years, and she was adamant that there was paranormal activity. Completely convinced. I wonder if she worked there when the electricians were receiving shocks. That all sounds quite scary, I think. In the last drop, two members of staff told me that they hated the cellars. They always feel horrible when they are in them, and they've both heard their names being called by a female voice. So I thought that was interesting, but another member of staff said they'd not experienced anything. And the White Hart Inn has some really cool displays about Burke and Hare if you are in the Grassmarket, which are worth a look, and I really enjoyed the Grassmarket. It's a very cool area of the city. If you are interested in Burke and Hare, you must visit the Surgeons' Hall Museum, which is worth a visit in itself, but the William Burt death mask, it is so chilling. And they've got that book made of his skin. It's really creepy. They also have Robert Knox's violin and some other bits and pieces, and it is really creepy to think that these were real people, these murders really happened, and Robert Knox really did get off very lightly, even though in my mind I have no doubt that he knew that those bodies were murder victims. There are some excellent documentaries about Burke and Hare on YouTube. It really is a complex and frightening sequence of events, and I'm currently reading Burke and Hare by Owen Dudley Edwards, and it's really, really interesting. Another place that's worth a visit is the National Museum of Scotland, which is free and has some extraordinary exhibits. The stuffed remains of Dolly the sheep are there on a turntable, and I must admit the eyes really freaked me out a bit. Dolly the sheep was the first cloned mammal, I believe, and she died in 2003. And now I don't know if she's been on that turntable for 22 years, but she was the creation of University of Edinburgh, so she was like a scientific marvel. But those eyes are creepy. My favourite item at the museum is the Maiden, which is on the ground floor in the new building, and if you get lost, ask any member of staff and they'll help you. They were all excellent. I will go into more detail about this when I cover Edinburgh Castle, but in effect this is a forerunner of the guillotine, and it was used in public executions between 1564 and 1716. It is something to behold, and it was used to decapitate over 150 condemned people. And it really does look like something from the Flintstones, and it's got a 34 kilo lead weight on it, and my understanding is that it was not always completely reliable, and just the thought of that alone is pretty bad. And then it could be folded up for easy storage. How convenient. Also in the room with the Maiden are some rather chilling items used in the interrogation of witches, torture devices and all sorts of horrible looking things. It is fascinating, definitely worth a visit. It is free, by the way, and there are some YouTube videos about the Maiden, but I will cover it more in the future. If you go to the National Museum of Scotland, be warned, it is absolutely huge, and I do think you're going to need very comfortable shoes. Okay, I have a menu for you today, and this is from Edinburgh, and this one dates back to December 1936. It is a Christmas-type menu from the Grand Lodge of Scotland, which is the Scottish Freemasons founded in 1736, and this was a luncheon held in the city chambers. We've got a nice picture of the castle looming over the Grassmarket, and I must say Edinburgh is a very, very hilly place, so just if you are going to go there, be warned. So we've got hors d'oeuvres, sort of little appetisers, Scotch broth. I wonder if there were any sheep heads involved in the creation of that. Haggis, roast turkey, and that's quite a lot of food. I had to look up Charlotte Russe, I'm not sure how you say that, and it's a sort of cake made with gelatine, cream and sponge fingers. Now this was a luncheon held on the 10th of December 1936, and you can see that they toasted the king, who was Edward VIII at that time. What the attendees didn't know was that on that evening, Edward VIII had signed the instrument of abdication in the presence of his brother Albert, the Duke of York, so that he could go on to marry Wallis Simpson. And the following day, on the 11th of December, he addressed the nation by radio from Windsor Castle, and at 13:52 that day, he officially ceased to rule. He made his famous speech where he said, "I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do without the help and support of the woman I love." His reign lasted for 325 days, and his abdication completely reshaped the future of the British royal family. So I thought that was quite a cool menu. I've just got 2 postcards for you. This first one is from December 1914 and has a rather lovely view of Edinburgh from the castle. And considering this postcard is 114 years old, it is in very good condition. Let's have a look at it. My dear mother, another postcard to you. I am afraid I will not be home this week as I have to go to Fife to a dinner. Best love to self. I think that might say Togo, maybe that's the name of a pet, something like that. So a little message to his mum in Glasgow. This next postcard is not so easy to read and I can only make out some of it, but it sounds like this person is having a very enjoyable trip to Scotland, so I'll just read a section of it. We visited Edinburgh Castle this morning and thoroughly enjoyed it, and also saw John Knox's house and Holyrood Palace. We left about 4 p.m, having previously booked rooms at the Spread Eagle Hotel, Jedburgh, where we now are. As we had lunch in Edinburgh, we have had a picnic supper in our bedroom. Now, I can't really make out much more of it, but the reason I thought this was interesting is that because it mentions Jedburgh, which is reputedly quite a haunted location, in particular Jedburgh Castle Jail, which I think I will cover in the future. To be honest, there are so many places to cover in Scotland. I could make so many videos covering its haunted locations. Do let me know in the comments what you think about that. Anyhow, that's it from me today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please feel free to like and subscribe. This really does help my channel to grow. And don't forget to come and find me on Instagram, where there are some little videos about my trip to Edinburgh. Take care, guys, and I'll see you on the next one.